Slowly but surely, yeah. Glad to hear that.
Well, it is time to get started this morning. So over the last several months, we've been looking at Ezekiel, and we're at the end of the section of overall, really, the book. I mean, it's getting to kind of a wrap-up point of it. So I was looking at it, trying to figure out how much of the last few chapters we wanted to read through and how much of it we wanted to summarize. And one of the things that, as I was looking at it, the last chapters are, a lot of it is a lot of detail that is meant for the people who needed the detail. And it's one of those that you can really miss the point of the last few chapters if you don't skim over it. And so, I mean, we can always go back and read it again, but we're going to do a little bit more skimming than we've been doing throughout this on there. Now, I know this is hard to read, but I'm going to point this out and kind of walk you through a little bit of what this says up here. So this is a little bit of a timeline of the of what we've been looking at. Whoops, that would not be the button I wanted to hit. This would be the one. All right, so up here, the focus of it, the first chapter, starting from 1 to about chapter 24, that was a real inward focus on there. It was predicting the fall of Jerusalem, talking about how judgment was near, and the reasoning behind it. Remember, the rationale behind why there was so much judgment that was to come was brought upon by themselves from all the idolatry that they'd got mixed up in and the complete rejection of God. Well, that was the first 24 chapters of the book. All of it, the entire time, it's set in Babylonia. The entire length of time of the book, from the start to the end of the time that has elapsed, is about 22 years. And it's all written by Ezekiel. And so that part continues on. But after chapter 24, it switches into this more outward focused section where there was the announcement of the fall. It talks about the judgment on Judah's enemies, the judgment on Egypt. And so the announcement of the fall, before all that, it was the pronouncement of the judgment on Israel and Israel and Israel. And then it's like, and everybody around you too. It's that judgment that's going to be more outward. And then we got into this section starting last a couple times where we were looking, starting in chapter 33, when we got into there, of more of a future, kind of looking forward, the restoration, the hope part of it. So this is promising restoration with hope ahead, the new shepherd, the new life, the new temple, and new worship. And so the new temple and the new worship is a lot of rules and regulations that are going to govern that and talk about that. So in these last few chapters, they're focused on the new temple, the new worship, and that's what we're up to. And I was like, well, do we want to split this up into two different weeks, or do we want to look at the whole thing as a sum total? So we're going to try to get through all of it, which means it's not going to be reading through it as thoroughly as we have in the previous chapters. But it's a forward-looking section of Ezekiel that is that's already past the foretelling. It's past the happening of the destruction. And so now it's focusing on this hope ahead. The question comes over a lot of this as we'll look is, when is this hope going to happen? When is it really talking about? So Ezekiel 40 is where we left off. We went all the way through, pretty much read through everything in the first 39 chapters. So these last 7 or 8 chapters, we're going to skim over a little bit more. So in the 25th year of our exile, now I just said it lasted for 22 years, but remember this book didn't get written on day 1 of the exile. They'd been in exile for a few years by the time all of the stuff and the events of Ezekiel back in chapter 1 even started. So now we're 22 years later, in the 25th year of the exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the fall of the city. So now we're well beyond that as well. On that very day, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he took me there. In the visions, he took me to the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain on whose south side were some buildings that looked like a city. All right, so kind of get the picture here that there is this, once again, Ezekiel being taken to Jerusalem and to see this. All right, so Josh, if you're ready, I'll have you read verse 3 for us.
He took me there, and I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. He was standing in the gateway with a red cord, a measure rod, and his hand. Matt, now we're back to you.
All right, thank you, Josh. All right, so we're going to see this picture of this man who's got this measuring cord, that is this measuring rod, and he's going to be laying out certain sizes and instructions for that. This man clearly is not a man as we see later, he is angelic. He is a messenger of the Lord. So this is a message that God has delivered. First of all, where was the setting of this book? Where was he when this was given to Babylon? Where is he in this vision? Jerusalem. He's the only escapee. He's made it back a couple times, and it doesn't say in a vision I was shown this. It was I was taken there. And he got to see firsthand. He was carted away by the Spirit, by an angel, by God himself. He was taken to these places to see these things. He has now transcended time because he has now seen a vision of what is to come. He's been carted to something else. Again, I don't think these are just dreams he's having. I don't know how it works. I don't know how God transcends time, but he does. We know that. We understand his eternity is that he exists at all time. And he can take Ezekiel and be like, look at this part. And he can do that. It's hard for us to wrap our mind around that. But there's some sort of not only escaping Babylonia, but some form of time travel that has, however it is, he's being given a vision of the future in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how. Can't wrap my mind around it exactly. I can try. And I'll be about as futile of an attempt of successfully doing that as you will. Like, we can't wrap our mind around exactly how this happens, but he's shown this. And so he says, Son of man, look carefully and listen closely and pay attention to everything I'm going to show you, for that is why you've been brought here. Tell the people of the people of Israel, everything you see. Now, this is going to be a really important part. We're going to come back to that idea there in a second. I saw a wall completely surrounding the temple area. The length of the measuring rod in the man's hand was 6 long cubits, each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. He measured the wall. It was 1 measuring rod thick and 1 rod high. All right, so there's all these details that if we were to continue to read every single verse, we're going to hear this one's 500 cubits, this one's 25. All these cubits and measures and all these different things that if you were to get out there and sketch it all out, you'd have the blueprints, basically, for what this is. What is the purpose, though? As we kind of see, part of this is going to be the temple. Part of it's going to be the area surrounding it. What is the purpose, though, of the temple on earth? Not necessarily what we're just reading, but what is the purpose of for worship?
To get the people focused on the Lord, to worship and to focus on the Lord, to follow the commandments that involve the temple and involve what it was to be a Jew.
You're right. And so to say, though, that the purpose of the temple is to follow the rules of the temple, it's more, I know what you're getting at, but if you think about it this way, the purpose of following the rules of the temple so that you can get the right use of the temple out of it, right? The right purpose behind it. Like, you're right on. It's just like, if you look at the order of it, it's really, the rules were meant to be the ones to get them to understand the purpose of the temple. What was it, though? I mean, it's to worship God, but what is it about the temple? Why does it need to be on earth? Why does it need to be there? Yeah. It's his dwelling place. And why does it need to be so specifically drawn out? All right. What did it represent? Yeah.
The holiness of God, so it has to be a certain way so that God can dwell there.
And he dwelled there in that exact representation of what it really represented, which was the throne room of heaven. It was the shadow of the throne room of heaven. So to look like it, it needed to look like it. To be a representation, it needed to match it. And so it represented that eternal dwelling place of God. And so for him to dwell among them, he needed to have that place look the part. So why did it need to be a certain layout and order to the design of it? Because it had a purpose to match up to what it represented in heaven. And you go back into Exodus, and you'll see this. This was a theme back in that time. It says when the tabernacle was being instructed to be given. It says, then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. Then make it 7 lamps and set them. This a little bit later. Make it 7 lamps and set them up on it. though they will light the space in front of it. Its wick trimmers and trays are to be of pure gold. A talent of pure gold is to be used for the lampstand and all these accessories. See that you make them according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. It was always about this specificity and the details. So we're going to get chapters of this in Ezekiel, these specific instructions on how to relay this out. And so rather than reading every verse of the last few chapters and getting into the weeds on the measurements, which were important, and we have to understand I'm not skimming over it because of a lack of importance. We're not going to be the builders who need that blueprint. And so we don't need to do the sketching and the CAD drawings and everything else you would do if you're an architect and trying to have this exact layout so that you can get to your subcontractors and make sure they're doing things the right way. And it needed to be done just the right way. And so there's a lot of information given there. But we're going to pick out certain parts that there's some big concepts intermixed within this. So first of all, there was a goal ahead of them that if they did what they were to do, they had this goal out ahead of them. What is that goal? Get back to Jerusalem and to worship, because specifically, and we've said already, what happens in the temple? God dwells among them. That's the goal. To do that, they had to make sure there was always purifications. So there's going to be a lot of rules and regulations given back to them yet again about how to do that, how to purify themselves, how to purify the place, so that glory of God can once again return back to there. Okay, so here are some of the things that we're not reading that were measured. The measurements were given for how to do the east gate that led to the outer court and the outer court itself. The north gate as well as the south gate were also given that. Do you know why there was no western gate? What was on the west side? The wall. That's the western wall. The west. So there was no gate to get in. The temple didn't sit in the middle of a completely surrounded court. It was off-centered, so it sat on the edge of that. And so there was a wall, and then the courts around it, and it had an east, north, and south gate to it. All right, so then there was gates that led into the inner court. Now you're getting closer to the western side of the temple where the actual temple would be housed, and so there was instructions for that. The rooms for preparing sacrifices were given instructions. And interesting, as these instructions are being given during that time period, it's also giving instructions over and over about the people who would be in those areas and what they had to do and when they could come and go, because they couldn't just go become unclean again and intermix. They had certain rules that they had to follow throughout that entire time. Everything is very specific on that, and the rooms for the priests as well. So we go into Ezekiel 41. We're going to see some of this. It says, "The man brought me to the main hall and measured the jambs. The width of the jambs was 6 cubits on each side. The entrance was 10 cubits wide, and the projecting walls on each side of it were 5 cubit wide. He also measured the main hall. It was 40 cubits long and 20 cubits wide." Again, that's a chapter and a half of all of that we kind of skipped by. So it's a lot of just that real detailed, listing of exactly how it was. Then he went into the inner sanctuary and measured the jambs of the entrance. Each was 2 cubits wide. The entrance was 6 cubits wide, and the projecting walls on each side of it were 7 cubits wide. And he measured the length of the inner sanctuary, and it was 20 cubits, and its width was 20 cubits across the end of the main hall. And he said to me, "This is the most holy place." And so now he's shown the size of what all of that is. What was the instruction that this man originally gave to Ezekiel when he showed him all this? What was he to do with all this information? Who was he to tell? Everybody. The Israelites needed to know everything he was shown. And so either he has had it burned into his memory, or he's jotting down notes, or he's going to be given all this information that he needs to give very specific information. Is Ezekiel the one that goes back and rebuilds the temple? No. So he needs to pass this information along. So later, when the temple is rebuilt, it's rebuilt to these levels. Who built the last temple that was destroyed? Solomon, right? But it's destroyed. So now, if they're going to rebuild a temple, and it needs to be done the correct way, God's going to want it to be done in this correct fashion. And so they need all the measurements again and all the rules of how that's going to be. And it'll be laid out again in that same way. So again, so why so many rules? So in all of that part that we did skim by, about a chapter and a half so far, he gave several rules about when the priests would enter and they would leave the holy places. And what they could wear, it was very specific about that, where the sacrifices were to be kept so that they didn't get tainted and all that. Why did he need to be specific with them particularly about how to treat something holy? Yeah. If you didn't hear that, they'd forgotten it. They had no clue as how to be holy.
Not that I disagree with Judith's point that they've forgotten, but I think it's a little more than forgotten. I forgot where my keys were this morning, but that's not quite the same.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. Like, if we say the word forgotten, and I think where we're going with that is forgotten is it's lost from their memory, not by an accidental, I misplaced it.
Yeah.
It was a deliberate.
And I'm not criticizing.
No, I know what you're saying. I'm like, you guys are on the same page, and I know, but that's a good point to point out. It's not the way we would say forgotten is like, oh, I forgot I was supposed to do something holy, or whatever. It is a true disobedient forgetting of it.
They had overlaid it with idolatry. So
That's right.
that was what was in the forefront of their mind more than how they were supposed to be.
Yeah. And the rules of how to, like, the fact that you couldn't even change a certain garment going in and out of these places mattered. And yet, several years back, 25, 30 years ago for many of them, they were in there sacrificing swine, sacrificing babies, sacrificing anything they could find to whatever god they wanted to sacrifice to. That is exactly what they were guilty of doing. And now they're hearing all of these rules about exactly what you should be doing there. And it was a reminder to them of this is what you'd forgotten. Remember that if you go back a handful of generations prior to all of this, there was a 70-year time that they even lost the law books entirely. And we don't know after Josiah found them and kind of got them back on track. We know they didn't stick around in that state very well. We don't know if they've lost them again. We have no recollection, or we have no information about what they know, as far as whether or not they, it's so far removed from their mind that they needed it retold to them with very specific rules and regulations again. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you just beat me to that question. I was about to ask that. It's been burning me to wonder for quite a while between Josiah and now.
What happened?
Yeah.
Well, we do know a little bit. So what led up to their demise? After Josiah left, see, the thing is, and I don't know if it was early on, we talked about it once, that Josiah's son is one of the ones who, we're not very far off from this time period. So Josiah, his youngest son, and I'm going to forget his name off the top of my head, but if somebody remembers, remind me, he was 9 years old when Josiah died, and he ends up becoming king. The problem is, he didn't really learn what he needed to know from his father, so he didn't carry on in his father's footsteps. What he saw were his older brothers who had already turned from that. And so they all start drifting away, and this is how you start to get into Jehoiachin eventually up to him, where he's pushing back away, and that may be Josiah's son. If I may be mixing them up, guys. There's a couple Jehoiah something, but Jehoiachin I think is the last one. That really did everything in. He's the one that ended up having to have his eyes gouged out, and after they murdered his sons because he was carted off to Babylon, and that's how they killed him, or not killed him. That they killed his sons, and that's how they took him away, and then they put another one in charge. And so it's sad the way all of this kind of played itself out, because Josiah tried to fix that. After 70 years, probably back to Hezekiah's reign, we know the northern kingdom went off the rails and they're just gone at that point. The southern kingdom was pretty good during the reign of Hezekiah. And then right after he was gone, they lost the book of the law for 70 years, and then Josiah finds it again. I don't think it's unreasonable to think they lost it again as soon as Josiah was out of the picture, because they're not focused on this. This is not their intention. It's not their heart. It's not what they wanted. they had gone so far off the deep end. When you lose respect for God, losing God's word's not a big deal to you. When you lose the awe of the Almighty, then ignoring his holiness is not a big deal to you. And we see that during this time. And that was a problem because he couldn't do anything more to get him back. So we read 30-some chapters of him telling them, I've tried everything else, and when all this happens to you, don't blame me. Blame yourselves, because I tried everything. I've exhausted every possibility through every king who led you, even though I told you never wanted to have kings because I told you this would happen. And it's a 35, 36 chapter long, I told you so. I can't fix the problem other than this. This is the only way to fix it. And now he's fixed the problem, and he's got to restart and hit the reset button with them and teach this to them all over again. But
how far it is? I can't remember. I mean, I counted after, but from Josiah's death until Ezekiel's doing this,
so,
trying to bring the temple back together. Do we have
okay, well, we're 25 years into the captivity. The captivity happened in 597. No, this one would have been 586 on that one. There was a little bit of it in 597, but the one this is specifically talking about is 586.
Because there was a little time.
I'm wrong on that one. This was the 597 one. So and then 586 more happens. So from 597, we're 25 years after that, so we should be up to about 572 or so by this point, where we're reading in. You go back to Josiah, and I have to look again. I believe it was like 619. That's the number that's sticking out. I could be wrong. 609. Okay, so we're not that far away. I mean, it was very quickly after Josiah, because again, it was the next generation that went off the rails. It was because he never knew his dad, because he died his dad was killed when he was too young. And so he never knew him. And so he just never followed in his dad's footsteps. So he never got to see the reforms Josiah was trying to do. And so all of this happened. Now we're into this, everyone else who were the leaders, who probably didn't really have the heart of change that Josiah did, clearly, because they were ready to switch right back. He had to get rid of all of them. He had to clean house. And now we're back to, okay, now let's rebuild this house. And that's what these chapters are all about. When the last time Ezekiel was brought to Jerusalem, what was going on there? So what was happening when he was brought to Jerusalem, especially at the East Gate?
In person or in a vision?
Again, is there a difference? Because we know he was brought there. The last time he would have been there on his own free will, he may have seen this stuff, but when the Lord brought him there, he saw, the vision he saw was of the glory of God, but it doesn't say that he went there on a vision. This is where it gets really tough to know whether or not he physically went there, but just so we're not splitting hairs, let's say that event, whether or not it was he physically went there or he was mentally shown this or however it happened. Last time he was there in a vision or otherwise. What is he seeing?
Was that the one where he looked through the wall and he was worshiping they were worshiping the sun?
Yeah, okay, so he looked through the wall and they were burning incense to all the other gods. He went to the east gate and they were bowing down to the sun. So yes, that's the event. So the last time, and so the very starting point of, let's rebuild this thing, we'll start at the east gate. I don't think there's anything that's not, unusual about that, because that is the point at after all of that happened, God gets back up on his platform that has the spinning wheels covered in eyes and all of that, guarded by the cherubim and everything, hovering with those whirling wheels and everything, the vision that he saw. And what does God do there? Leaves it. And he leaves the temple. He leaves that. As a result of that, bowing down and worshiping the sun. And worshiping, which is a distinct form of Satanism. And it's a distinct form of worshiping the creation rather than the creator. It's everything about it is wrong. And they had gone so far off, that was like the final thing. God gets up, packs his things, and takes off. And he leaves distinctly letting them know, when this temple goes down, I'm not going down with it, because that is not my house right now. You guys have turned it into something else entirely. And that was kind of the purpose of him being able to see all of that. So at the start of chapter 43, he's then brought to this future East Gate location, and we're shown this where it says, "Then the man brought me to the gate facing the east, and I saw the glory of God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory." This is an exact reversal of what we saw way back in the early chapters when God departed and let all this happen. So now he's returning. "The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I had seen by the Kibar River, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east." He came right back the way he left. But this time he came back into a rebuilt, structurally appropriate, servicely appropriate. I mean, everything about it is the right thing. It's followed the pattern of the building of it. Those inside are living it out the way they should be living it out. And he returns. And his glory is once again residing among them. "Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple." And we see this restoration. Imagine yourself as one of these exiles. One of the exiles that was spared. And you didn't participate in the things that you knew were going on, and maybe still had a heart for what you wanted, because there obviously were some of them, because God kept trying to reach them. The ones that don't go down with everybody else kind of idea. He kept trying to reach out to them, and so we see that in those earlier chapters. And so now you have this returning of it, and what a glorious thing. Ezekiel would fall into that category of men who did not bow down to the east and worship the sun, who did not worship the other gods that were being worshipped in the temple. He didn't participate in that. He longed for this. And so to be shown this is true restoration. This is that hope that he's been longing for. "While the man was standing beside me." Oh, by the way, what did he just call that man? In the last few verses. Did you catch that? Right there. Okay. "Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court." And then he says, "While the man was standing beside me." I think this is intermixed this is an embodiment of the Spirit that is bringing him there. And because there's a physicalness to it, he keeps referring to him as the man. I think he was brought there. I think he's been brought to a different place at a different time, and he's being shown this is how it comes together again. So you've got to go back and make sure you tell them to do this exactly this way, because this is how this plays out. What an amazing God we serve. Sometimes when you think about what he can do, that I can't wrap my mind around how this is conceivable, let alone possible, and he just does it. He just picks him up and is like, "Oh, let's go to the future real quick, and I'll show you how this plays itself out as we, if you give them the right message, here's how this all happens." So he said, "Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever." Who just said that? The man, the Spirit. Who do you think he's talking to? I think he's talking to God. Yeah, I mean, this is the dwelling place of the Lord. Now, the glory of the Lord has already filled the place. He's already fallen down in that reverent fear of seeing it, and now he's in this presence of this, and he's able to see that this man that he sees, who is God. Is it weird for us to think that God could show up as the embodiment of a man? It is Jesus as the Son. It's the way in which he can operate. "So the people of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death. When they placed their threshold next to my threshold and their doorpost next to my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them, they defiled my holy name by their detestable practices." They were so brazen that they just built right up next to the temple, and did it whatever they wanted to right up next to it. One wall of separation is what he was saying. Like, it's not going to happen again. That's not the way it's going to go down. So I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings, and I will live among them forever. In other words, if they do what I want, I will live among them forever. Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their sins. Let them consider its perfection. And if they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement. Let's see. All right. Its arrangement, its exits and entrances, its whole design, and all its regulations and laws. Write these down before them so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all its regulations. These aren't rules for the sake of rules. These aren't shapes and sizes for the sake of shapes and sizes. This is purposeful design by God to represent the throne room of heaven, so that when worship was being done in the temple, it mimicked what was being done in heaven. And that was the idea behind it. It was to draw them close to him so that he could be in their midst and dwell in them. The temple is necessary. So why don't we have it now? We become the living temple. We become the temple where God can reside in us. And I bet we would have the same thing if we're faithful to its design and we follow its regulations and we do what we're told. Those things, those stipulations don't go away just because the method by which he builds up the temple has changed so that he can dwell among us more universally in that sense. But this is the law of the temple. All the surrounding area on top of the mountain will be most holy. Such is the law of the temple. And they were to follow it. And that was the instructions given to them. All right, so the final chapters that we get into, 40 and 42, or 40 through 42 as we looked at, was that large new temple's being described. 43 is when God's glory returns to that temple. And then the last chapters of 44 through 46, the sacrifices start to get resumed, and there's instructions about how to do it, who can do it, and all of those instructions. And then the last two chapters, and I'll be honest, Ezekiel ends in the most abrupt way possible. It's all this land division, and then it's just over. And there's no, if you're told to write a story, you need to go back and you need to do a summary page and write all this stuff. It just ends. And the story just cuts off after the land is distributed, because everything that needed to be told was told at that point. Future books, Ezra, Nehemiah, some of the other ones, tell a lot about that. When you get to the end of Ezekiel and you turn the page, you're in Daniel, which is the also happening at the same time story of what's happening in Babylon the city, not just in the Babylonia area, but in Babylon the city, at the palace. All of these things were taking place, and God's already working to make these things happen that Ezekiel's telling them will happen. And then finally, because of Daniel's influence, he's able to get safe passage through the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so that during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, Zerubbabel is able to go back there and rebuild all this stuff. All of these things that you read about in later books are because of what God is doing here, and he's already shown the end result of that to Ezekiel. Amazing, right? There's one final character, though, in Ezekiel that has been the source of a question mark hanging over it. All right, so look at this out of chapter 45. The prince will have the land bordering each side of the area formed by the sacred district and the property of the city. It will extend westward from the west side and eastward from the east side, running lengthwise from the western to the eastern border, parallel to one of the tribal portions. This was after the division of the land had kind of been talked about briefly. More specifically, it gets broken down in the later chapters. This land will be his possession in Israel. And my princes will no longer oppress my people, but will allow the people of Israel to possess the land according to their tribes. First of all, notice what he calls them. It's not kings anymore, right? It's been knocked down a notch because God's king. So now he has princes, all right? And that's important to note. There's something of note there. In the first month of the 14th day, you are to observe the Passover. So we're a little bit later talking about the rules of the Passover and the sacrifices. Remember, these chapters 44, 45, 46. We're talking about the rules of bringing back the worship rules and all of that. And so he says, in the first month on the 14th day, you are to observe the Passover, a festival lasting 7 days, during which you shall eat bread made without yeast. On that day, the prince is to provide as a bull as a sin offering for himself and for all the people of the land. All right, so this brings up this question of who the prince is. On this one, is this a representation of Jesus? No, but what's the one biggest reason why? First of all, it doesn't fit on a lot of different things, but there's one really glaring one that we just read. Yeah, he does not need to offer a sin sacrifice for himself. So if this prince was Jesus, the sinless, blameless, spotless lamb, why is he offering a sacrifice for his own sin? Wouldn't make any sense. So that wouldn't apply to him. It also doesn't really match, quite honestly. A lot of people try to break this into 3 different groupings of who it might be. Jesus is pretty quickly ruled out as one of them. Another one is that it was historical figures, and it wasn't just one. It was the people who were the leaders, but no longer the kings. And that seems pretty reasonable. We don't have an exact listing of every one of them, but it kind of matches on there. Before we get into this one, the third one is one where they try to make it a prince who will come back and set up his kingdom, or set up his territory when Jesus returns on his throne. Again, that misreading of the book of Revelation, you got to fix a whole lot of Old Testament books too. And if you expect Jesus to come back and reign on an earthly throne, you better have a prince to go with them. And all these little things start unraveling. And so that misteaching of the book of Revelation finds itself in a lot of expectations that people have. Oh, this must be talking about the millennial reign that is in the future. I don't know why that would have been a message of hope to Ezekiel about something happening that many thousands of years in the future when he said, this will happen if you tell the Israelites to build it just this exact way. It seems much more likely that these were earthly princes that were in a role. What were those 2 primary roles? You have to kind of know, we haven't read all of it, but if you've read through this before, might have to help a little bit on this one. But what were some of it? We told one of them. If he's offering sacrifices, he's doing priestly duties. So one of it's priestly. And the other one is very much administrative. He's kind of like the one in charge, similar more to a judge. So he's got a political and a religious kind of role to him. So is this a specific person, or is it a position that will be held during that time? I'm not going to stand before you and say I know the answer to this one. I'm going to leave it as, I don't know. How far in the future is it? Again, I don't know. We sometimes have to be comfortable with this idea is that we don't know for certain. I think we can rule out Jesus. For a variety of other reasons, we can rule out a prince during some millennial reign because that doesn't make sense when you read the New Testament, that would even be a correct teaching. So now you're back to it's got to be something else that happened during the time of Israel, because he's talking specifically about the land surrounding the temple that he had Nehemiah and Ezra started, but Nehemiah kind of finished up with all of that help during that time period. So it makes most sense that it would be that. I don't know if how comfortable you are with this idea of the I don't know happening in Scripture, but I'm okay with it. I think at that point, because I don't have the answer, so it's not like I'm going to be able to stand up here and tell you I know for certain. Scholars all still argue about this. This is a very highly contested point, because if you can come up with a rationale behind why you think it's your way of thinking, and if you can prove it, that bolsters your case for whatever other teaching you might be kind of going after. On that one, I think ultimately, in light of the book of Ezekiel and what it's about and what it was really telling us about, it was going back to the beginning. It was a warning to Israel that I'm done with you for what you've done, but I'm not permanently done with you. And I'm done with you, but not done with you. It's like he was very much going after their practices. And it was so that people will know that I am the Lord. And they will know that when I say something, I will do it. I'm not all talk, because that had been an accusation about him as well. His patience was being misconstrued as weakness. And so he's saying, no, there's no weakness involved here. Don't misunderstand my patience and my love and my grace for you as weakness, because your time's up. And he goes on the attack against them, or lets the people around him kind of come in and attack. And before they get too haughty, he turns around and says, by the way, all you nations, I used you, and now you're going to pay for doing what you did to my people. And then he turns around and, does that. And he says, by the way, they're still my people. He puts them back in the land. And he says, now, my people, do exactly what I'm telling you to do. It's what I started to do. He told Moses these things, and he reiterates it to them. It says, do it the right way, follow the pattern, do it exactly how it is. And I told you all along, I'm not letting you have a king. My princes, who will help run things here, notice he lowers their position down, because a prince doesn't have the authority a king has. He can't do the things a king can do, because there's only one king now over Israel, which is what he wanted all along. And he says, I will be your king. And so you kind of see that. He's already made that promise, remember, just a few chapters ago. I will be your king. I will be your king. So why would he have another king in charge? He puts a prince in charge of that. So that's kind of Ezekiel in a nutshell. So any questions or any final thoughts over any parts of what we had? Yeah.
I was just thinking, talking about now we're the temple of God, and I was thinking David's prayer in Psalms 51:11 about please don't take the Holy Spirit away from me. And I wonder if we can, be aware of that danger. One of the blessings of being baptized or receive that Spirit, but can we, can the temple become someone else's at some point? The danger of losing that, but also the hope that if that happened, the redemption and the just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought, because that's a lot of people try to write that part out of Christianity, that there's any kind of fear that maybe you could fall. But we know that's not true. We know that there is that potential, otherwise he wouldn't warn us against it. We see examples of these people who had God's glory dwelling in their house, and they still drove him out. They drove him away on that. Interesting, though, when he comes back to the temple, if we were to pair that kind of thinking up with, there's still that restoration possible, with an understanding of Hebrews chapter 6, some of those first few verses, verses 1 through 6, after it describes someone who had been so close to God and had tasted that heavenly gift and had once been, had been redeemed and had, had that. They were a full-on Christian. When they fall away, it is impossible to find a way to draw them back. I think God knows that, because he tried to do it with the Israelites. You can't say something enough to make them come back. Now, could they choose to come back? Yes. Can you do anything to fix their problem? Unfortunately, no. I mean, you could try, and you might be successful, but there's a point where they get so far gone that they're going to have to make the turn themselves. You can't persuade them anymore when they already know the argument, when they already know the teaching. It's hard to persuade people with the teaching. It's easy to persuade someone who's seeking a better life and they know nothing about God for them to understand this is the better way. Okay, well, that makes sense, and they'll turn their way. When somebody had been a part of this and chooses to leave, it is really hard to steer them back. That's kind of the very heavy passage in Hebrews chapter 6, but that never says there's no chance for them to come back. He just talks about it's impossible for you to do that for them. But God multiple times talks about how, there's forgiveness for the sinner. There's hope for that. We see this. These people were about as bad as a group of people could have gotten. And yet here he is saying, and I will dwell with them forever if they just do this and follow them. Let me have my home with them again, and let them rebuild it the way it's supposed to be built. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I just have one question. When it was talking about how he was saying about funeral arrangements in the same tone that he was talking about their idolatry.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere in the Bible that it actually explains what they did during the funeral?
Not that I've found, and if it's there, I haven't looked for it specifically, but I didn't stumble across it in this text. So my understanding of it is that as a practice to them, as part of the pagan worship, some of that Asherah Baal worship, was a lot of idol worshiping and sacrificing would be done at the loss of a leader, like a king. And so they would often, sacrifice their own children to these leaders and stuff like that. I don't know if that's what it was being talked about at their funerals or what exactly it was, so they could then pass on. It was a total pagan practice of whatever it was that they were doing. And he says, never again. You're not doing that again. I've told you once. He's jealous enough to never let that transpire once again. If anyone else has a harder question, we're out of time. So we'll wrap up there. We will switch topics. Haven't fully decided what. So if somebody has something in mind they want us to look at as we head into the next quarter, let me know. Otherwise, I'll kind of search through some things and come up with another book. Hopefully you enjoyed Ezekiel. It's kind of an unusual one. We don't study a lot, but it's got a lot of really good stuff in it. So.